Here's your opportunity to listen and learn from the most successful people driving growth and success in Palm Beach County and beyond. Welcome to the Business in Paradise Palm Beach podcast with Cary Stamp, founder of Cary Stamp & Company, Principled Wealth Advisors. Cary and his guests share stories and insights from Palm Beach County's most successful executives, entrepreneurs, and community leaders. Learn how they made it to where they are today, what principles guide them, how they mentor others to achieve success, and more.
Hi, I'm Cary Stamp, and this is the Business in Paradise podcast, where we talk to the great business leaders of Palm Beach County, Florida, the place that we are fortunate to work and play. My guest today is Dan Sheehan, the chairman and CEO of Professional Bank and Professional Holding Corporation. Dan has deep roots in Palm Beach County, and we're going to hear his story today. Dan Sheehan, welcome to the Business in Paradise podcast.
Thanks for having me, Cary.
It's my pleasure. Dan, you actually grew up here. You're one of the few, I think, right?
Yeah, that's right. Well, I was born in upstate New York, Canandaigua specifically, but the family moved me down when I was 3 years old, 1978. I remember PJ Boulevard was 2 lanes, and you couldn't go on I-95 north of PJ. You actually had to jump on the turnpike and reconnect up at Yeehaw Junction. I've seen a lot of change over the years.
So what got your family to move from Canandaigua, New York to Palm Beach County, Florida? And that had to be almost 35 or 40 years ago?
Yeah, it was about 42 years ago, 43 years or so ago. But it's probably a question that's more appropriate for my father than I. I don't think the 3-year-old had a weighted decision in that process. But nonetheless, I think he was initially attracted to, what we're all attracted to, the weather. And this in many respects is still the wild, wild west. There's plenty of opportunity, no matter what business you're in, to thrive in any of your pursuits. It's a healthy place to live. It's a popular place to live. I think if you go back those 40 some years, you'll see that the migration trends have been fairly consistent. I'm sure there's ups and downs given certain economic events over time. But Florida has been a popular place to move to for years. And my father was in a couple of different businesses. He worked for Canandaigua Wine Company, among others. But he wanted to come down here and start his own real estate company, which he did.
And I know your father, and I know your dad's been incredibly successful in the real estate business down here. So give a little plug for what your dad does. And I understand your wife is also part of the team with your dad's real estate firm.
Yeah, so, he started it, I believe the year we moved down, 1978, maybe it was 79. But, he started as a one-man shop. And over the years has diversified into commercial, in addition to residential brokerage, has done quite a bit of development consulting, planned communities, as well as, high-density urban towers, primarily in northern Palm Beach County. Today, my wife, Christy, has, taken over the firm. And as my dad is, still actively involved in many respects, he's in his sunset years, so it's been fun for me to watch my wife take over a more active role in managing the company, which is well in excess of 40 years old. There's in that space, there's not too many real estate brokerage companies. You count with fingers just on one hand that have been around that long in northern Palm Beach County.
There's plenty of them that have come and gone, but the Sheehan agency has been there. It's been consistent for many, many years. So congratulations to your dad and now to Christy and Amin and the rest of the team at Sheehan Agency. So, Dan, you went to a private school here in North Palm Beach, I understand. Is that right? Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, that's right. So before the lower school, before it was called the Benjamin School, it used to be called the North Palm Beach Private School. And I started there in kindergarten. And two of my 3 children attend Benjamin now, which is kind of a fun reason one of the reasons why we came back from Miami. But I attended the Benjamin School up until my junior year. I transferred to the Palm Beach Gardens High School primarily for sports. I had a fairly good indication of some of the options I had with college, but decided to transfer to Palm Beach Gardens, which was the big public school at the time, to play football for the team and run track.
And Dan, you're kind of a little guy, so what position did you play in the football team?
So I was, high school, I was a wide receiver and free safety on defense, a wide receiver on offense. I weigh about 25 pounds lighter than I used to. I'm a lot less into, lifting weights, 2 or 3, twice a week, twice a day or otherwise. Much more interested in, joint mobility and just feeling good when I wake up. But I was a little bit bigger, but notwithstanding, I usually was one of the smallest guys on the field. I was just good at running away from people, I suppose.
That's a good skill to have. So you go from Benjamin to Palm Beach Gardens and then on to Duke, if I understand that correctly. Is that right?
That's correct. I was fortunate enough to play football for Duke University. I was there for 2 years. I had, back in high school, I had a complicating injury. I broke my compound fracture, lower right leg, tibia and fibia, and it started creating some real issues in college. I went on to play, and I got redshirted my freshman year at Duke. Played my sophomore year at Duke, but the injuries related to my broken leg, and I still have a titanium rod in my right leg to this day. It just started creating more and more problems. I was putting on more and more weight, but the mechanics of how I ran, my knee, which had been opened up and put back together twice, and the hip really started causing some problems. On top of that, being one of the smaller guys on the field, suffered my fair share of injuries. So started thinking about life after football at the end of my sophomore year at Duke, and end up transferring to the University of Florida.
So you go to the University of Florida, you graduate, and you come out after graduating from Florida. And so do you get your first job then?
Well, I'd had a series of jobs growing up. I mean, I remember, my first job was in Juneau Isles. I grew up in Juneau Isles Boulevard, and I was cutting lawns at the age of 10. After that, I worked at construction sites for a home builder here in town, Skip Gazzo. Skip was starting his home building business in Admirals Cove, and I worked a couple summers working for Skip's company as a laborer. You just do whatever work some of the tradesmen needed a helping hand. And then I got a really, really high-end job, high-end as in be working in air conditioning, and I was a bag boy at Publix. I was a bag boy at the Publix at the Bluffs shopping center for a year or two. And so if I don't know where you want to delineate my first real job or not, but I had a series of those jobs. But my first internship, and I also worked. Sorry, I'm going back to some of the jobs before what someone might consider my first real job. Was I worked as a busboy at Panama Hattie's. Panama Hattie's was a well-known restaurant right at the south west corner of Ellison Wilson and PGA Boulevard. The site's been vacant now, but that was my one and only job I've ever worked in a restaurant. And I tell you what, it was a great experience. You get an awful lot, much better appreciation of the folks in the service industry working at restaurants who wait on folks for a living. And, I got a lot out of it. I don't think I made a whole lot of money out of it, but certainly got a deeper appreciation for those in that business. So, I had a handful of internships, when I was in college. My first one, was at Duke, was right here at what used to be, Florida Power and Light. It's now NextEra Energy, in their workforce performance and development department. And this was a group that would study other Fortune 500 companies on what they did well, whether it was workflows, org charts, employee incentive programs. We'd go study these different companies and try to bring back and implement some of these ideas into the next era, or back then Florida Power and Light org chart and company and culture to see if it would work. And that was a summer. And I tell you what, I mean, throughout, I just mentioned some of the jobs I'd had previously. It was important to learn all the things I was learning on the job, but when you're a young person, at least my experience was, it was also important to learn what you don't want to do. And this workforce performance and development department was essentially an HR job. And while I learned a lot, the 2 or 3 months I spent there was enough for me.
Yeah, Dan, I can totally relate to that. Some of my earlier jobs led me to the conclusion that I knew what I didn't want to do. My father actually was an engineer and drove a train for what was then known as the Chicago and Northwestern Railroad. And he got me a job one summer working as a brakeman on the trains. And I pretty much knew at the end of that summer that this was not something that I wanted to pursue as a career. So I'm glad that I stayed in school and gave myself plenty of options. So I totally understand where you're coming from. So you've got all of these jobs, and this is a very common theme that I find among very successful business people, is that they do whatever it takes as kids growing up, mowing lawns, delivering the newspaper, doing whatever needs to be done around the neighborhood, working the grocery store, working at restaurants. That's fantastic. But you stayed in school, you got a degree, and you came out of school, and where did you go from there?
So my first finance job when I was wrapping up school was at Bear Stearns up in New York City. I was in a program that rotated young guys such as myself in between undergrad and business school into the various departments of the organization. I did get exposed to, corporate finance, some investment banking, but spent most of my time in their fixed income desk. They were back then one of the biggest fixed income shops in the world, and not only for their own account, but did a lot of the securities trading and settling third party for a lot of the other firms. And I really got a great understanding of the complexity and scale of the securities market up on Wall Street, and it was fascinating. I worked at 345 Park Avenue a portion of the time, and spent another portion of the time down at One Metro Tech, which was just across the bridge in Brooklyn.
Were you living up there by yourself? You're a single guy living in New York City?
I was living with a really good buddy of mine in the Upper West Side. It didn't suck. Yeah,
I can imagine. So how long did you spend in New York, and did you go from Bear Stearns to another job in finance?
So I did. So it was about a year and a half. And I had then decided to go back to school. So, one of the things that's great about Palm Beach County, is the weather, the lifestyle, et cetera. But when you grow up here, you don't know any better. And so you have to move away to appreciate that. And, I'd spent a couple of years up in North Carolina at Duke, and then another couple of years in Gainesville. But living in New York was a whole different experience. Using public transportation, the Decembers, Januaries, and Februaries with the weather, and I decided that I'd done pretty well for a year and a half. I established some great relationships with some folks at the firms, and believed that I had an opportunity to come back. Once I got done with business school. So I decided to go to business school, but in the time before I started school and when I was kind of winding down the Bear Stearns matter, I under the category of trying different things in different industries and jobs, I had an opportunity to work for MTV, music television, which again falls outside of perhaps what someone might think is the typical track for a finance guy, but it was under the philosophy of wanting to try as many different things at a young age as I could, to not only determine, well, what I really like, but, also what I don't like. And so, after a fairly intense, time at Bear, I thought, well, how great would this be? Totally new industry, totally different crowd. And what could I learn here? I'm still going to go back to business school and keep my option to go back to finance, but I was only 23, 24 at the time. Why not? So that same friend I mentioned to you that was living up in was sharing an apartment with me at Upper West Side, worked there, and he got me the job, and it was great. I traveled all over the country on MTV's dime, and this was primarily before reality TV. People forget that MTV created two shows, Road Rules and Real World, which were the first reality TV shows ever. And I got to work on a production with a production group called House of Style that produced a bunch of these really cool and funny, and in some cases, looking back, kind of cheesy shows in the late 90s. And it was fun. I didn't make a whole lot of money, but made an awful lot of friends and got to meet some really, really talented, interesting people along the way that, on one hand, might not be able to understand what I was doing at Bear Stearns, let alone balance their checkbook, but were geniuses when it came to, producing content and making these shows happen. I was fascinated. It was a really, really cool experience. So
they didn't let you on the air as a VJ. You were on the production side of the house at MTV?
I was on the production side, although there might have been a few instances where I showed up on camera.
We're going to need to see those clips, Dan. So I'm sure you still have them. So you're working at MTV. You're traveling all over the country. You're living in New York City. Sounds like an absolute dream job for somebody in their early 20s. So do you leave MTV and then go back to business school? Is that the order?
Yeah, so go back to business school, get serious again. I returned to Miami. I was still a relatively young guy to go back to business school. Many of the schools that were accepting applications that I had interested in wanted 4 to 5 years of work experience, and I didn't want to do that. I wanted to go to school. I thought that my time at Bear was at least worth maybe 3 to 4 years elsewhere. I was certainly running and working at that pace. And I thought, well, the opportunity cost is going to be greater and greater the longer I wait. And so I chose to go to University of Miami for a couple of reasons. One, they accepted me without the 5 years of work experience. They gave me a partial scholarship, as well as it was back in Florida. And, now I'm returning to Florida with a different perspective on the capital markets. And I realized quickly that if I wanted to, end up doing something in Florida, the further south you go in Florida, the closer you are to New York. And so I moved to Miami, went to school there. I got, a 2-year program done in about 11 months and, stayed in Miami for essentially 15 years.
Wow. So you did a 2-year business school program in 11 months?
That's right.
How'd you pull that off?
So I was able to test out a few of their mandatory classes up front, and I just went through the summer full curriculum and got permission from the dean. I think if you wanted to do more than the normal credits, you needed to get permission, and I did so. And again, it was under the thought that every day I'm in school, I've got a cash burn. Every day I'm out of school, I can start, making money and delivering some sort of economic return on this investment. So I thought, 11 months, I'll get it done, and I can get right back either up to New York and start, making a great living, or stay in Miami and design a new way to make money down there.
So at some point along the line, you meet Christy. When was that?
So Christy and I met in 2003.
Are you living in Miami at the time?
I'm living in Miami, and Christy is living in Washington, D.C. That buddy of mine that I was telling you worked for MTV has since left MTV, started his own company, and was one of the associate producers for what was then the NFL kickoff concert in Washington, D.C. I think it was either for ABC Sports or NBC Sports, but it was, I think, the Philadelphia Eagles were playing the Washington Redskins for the season opener, and there's this kickoff concert that was right on the Washington Mall in front of the Capitol building. And so it was, Mary J. Blige, Method Man, Aerosmith, and some Britney Spears maybe. And I was a single guy in Miami, and my buddies were producing this really big show, and they said, "Why don't you come up and hang out for the weekend?" So I came up, and being in D.C., I had a former teammate of mine at Duke who was our kicker, who I hadn't seen in a number of years. So I called him up and told him I was going to be in town with my friends producing the show, and let's connect for a drink. He asked if his little sister could join, and the rest is history.
Wow. That's a great story. So you meet her in Washington, D.C. You go back to Miami, and then I would imagine there's a little bit of back and forth and negotiating for a while, and then eventually you convince her that she needs to come to Miami. Yeah, well,
January, February, it's not that hard, and so, she decided to move. We decided, and I was welcome to have her move down to Miami. And, we lived in Miami. I was there for 15 years. She was there for 10 of them with me.
Wow. All right. And so in Miami, you get done with school and you re-enter the business world. Tell me what you were doing as you came out of school and started your business in Miami.
Yeah, sure. So, what I was doing up in New York really didn't exist down in Miami. And even today, New York is still the center of the world for finance. And if you wanted to do anything similar to what I was doing with any scale, you had to be back up in New York. I didn't really want to be in private banking. I'm just a gringo who speaks one language, okay, and maybe enough Spanish to get around in a bar, but that's about it. I mentioned before, my father had been in the real estate business for, such a long time. I figured out how to marry the two disciplines. So is there something I could do? I thought to myself that kind of marries, real estate with finance, capital markets, et cetera. And so what was happening was, there was a ton of capital migration down into South Florida, but most of the balance sheets for that capital formation was in the more sophisticated markets. So Boston, D.C., Chicago, New York, who were starting to make investments in South Florida. I mean, traditionally, South Florida really wasn't an institutional real estate market. This was just a kind of a second home place for many folks to come down to. But most of the big deals were just done with local banks, and in some cases a satchel full of cash from someone in South or Central America or Europe showing up. And so it was in the late 90s, early 2000s that there was capital formation around the asset class, and then we started to invest. And so I ended up working with a company called L.J. Melody and Company. I was, I think, the second guy to open up to be in their office in Miami, and that was with a joint venture with GE Capital. We serviced back then, and these are 2000 or 2001 dollars, 2002 dollars, $58 billion of real estate, debt, preferred equity. GE Capital used its balance sheet and the LJ Melody platform to deploy its capital into real estate investments. And of course, we service all the debt. Did that for a few years, and then that company was bought by CBRE, the large real estate services company, and subsequently went public. I took a little bit different approach to that. I really didn't think that being a public company in that market was the best move for a couple reasons. I just looked at South Florida, Miami in particular, being like the wild, wild west. There was so much opportunity to do a variety of different things, different businesses and so forth. And I just thought a public company structure would limit me individually in different things I wanted to do, not just invest on behalf of large investment institutions, but I wanted to be able to do my own deals. I wanted to develop real estate, invest in real estate with partners. I wanted to look at other businesses, tech or otherwise, and being in a public company structure was going to be limited in that. And so for the year prior, there was another firm called Cohen Financial, which was based in Chicago, that had been recruiting my team and I for a year, and we kept on saying no. Their offer to come over kept on getting sweeter, and once the CBRE deal was announced, so we left. Jack Cohen, who's the principal of Cohen Financial, his father founded that. It was much more entrepreneurial, much more boutique in nature. I had a great arrangement with the firm. I was actually one of, I think, the only independent contractor with the firm across the country. And my deal with Jack was, as long as I'm not competing with corporate clients or creating any risk for the business, and I just disclose what I'm up to, he would allow me to do different things. So whether it's start a bank, or invest in real estate, or invest in a tech company, or do any of these other things, as long as I was generating opportunity for the firm, he was going to let me do all these other things, which a public company typically would never let you do. So I was very fortunate for Jack to allow me to do that. And that really set me up to do a couple things. One, have access to, large institutional real estate balance sheets, whether it's sovereign wealth funds, private equity funds, endowments, foundations, which is great for kind of the big deal landscape, but also allow me the flexibility to do some of these smaller deals and jump on these opportunities that may not have suited, $100 million equity check, but it was a $4 to $5 million equity check that could be put together with me and a couple friends in a variety of different businesses. And so I was with that firm for 11 years. And it was only 2 years in, I suppose, that the professional bank opportunity presented itself.
Wow, Dan, and one of the things I distinctly remember Cohen Financial from my time in Chicago. They were certainly a huge player on the real estate scene in Chicago. And a little known fact about me is that many of my clients in Chicago were residential developers and home builders. And I spent about 6 years serving on the board of the Home Builders Association of Greater Chicago. And I know Cohen did probably a lot of multifamily deals, a lot of commercial deals, a lot of industrial type deals all over the Chicago area. So fantastic firm. So you're in Miami, you're kind of doing your own thing down there, very entrepreneurial experience. And then the professional bank opportunity comes up. How did that come about? How did you get in touch with them, or they get in touch with you, or what was the relationship?
Yeah, so my accountant at the time reached out to me one day and said, "Hey, look, there's a gentleman who had started a bank in the early 90s or maybe late 80s, and ultimately sold it to Bank Atlantic. But there's a guy who wants to start a bank, and he's looking to raise some money and put a board together." I figured I'd introduce you to him because you're a called me, thought I was a fairly enterprising guy. He says, well, let me make the introduction. So my accountant introduced me to a gentleman by the name of Larry Schimmel, who was the organizer, the original organizer, to get me involved. So I agreed to get involved. I invested alongside Larry. And we opened up the bank. We started working on it in 2007, put together a business plan, presented it to the FDIC and the Florida Office of Financial Regulation, and essentially got our charter approved in 2008. And I obviously been on the board ever since. And but I initially started the first several years. I was just an outside director. I chaired a few of our committees. But for the most part, I was still actively pursuing opportunities in real estate.
So now it's come about within the last few years, you become the CEO and I guess the chairman of both the bank and the holding company. Is that right?
Yeah. So in 2013, I became the chairman of the board of the bank. I had been I think I was the vice chairman for a year or two prior to that. And I immediately formed a holding company. And we don't need to get into it here, but there's various advantages to having a holding company structure over your bank as it relates to raising capital, et cetera. So we formed that in 2014. I became the chairman and CEO of the holding company, which is now, the public vehicle that we listed recently on the NASDAQ, and remained as chairman of the board. I became the executive chairman of the board towards the end of 2016. And recently became, I shouldn't say about a year ago, became the chairman CEO of the bank as well. So I've been the chairman CEO of the public holding company, or the bank holding company, since its inception, and chairman CEO of the bank, or CEO of the bank for a year, chairman of the bank for I guess going on 7 or 8 years now.
And Dan, tell us a little bit about professional banking. What's the target of the bank, and what's the reach of the bank from a geographic perspective?
Yeah, sure. So I'll back up for a minute and just kind of tell you a little bit about the bank and kind of the mindset around this, and perhaps from an entertainment perspective, you'd appreciate the ignorance that I, looking back, had for the banking business. So I told you that I decided to go in on this business, and I thought, well, gosh, every business is like a lemonade stand. Some are a little bit more complex than others, but gosh, as I understand it, you take people's deposits and you pay them interest at X. You take that same money, you lease it out in the form of loans at Y. After paying the employees and rent, we get to keep the difference. It's pretty simple to me. And that was right on the eve of the great global financial collapse of 2009. There were a lot of lessons learned. Fortunately, we had not made any bad bets, and quite frankly, were net beneficiaries of what happened, because we had a really, really strong balance sheet compared to our peers. But the whole thought around this was that, like I said, I thought it was a simple business, and in some respects, it still is a simple business. I think the complexity is how do you execute the business in an environment with so many different competing factors. But one of the observations I had made when I thought about getting into the business was there just weren't a whole lot of banks that I thought had a sense of hustle. Many of the banks seemed tired, and this was before, you got to remember, the introduction of a lot of the new technology that a lot of the bigger banks have now. The robust features on apps today weren't around back then. But, there weren't too many banks that had bankers out in the market that had a sense of urgency, that gave their cell phones out, that would work on weekends, et cetera. And I thought, well, how cool would it be if we had a bank that attracted some of the harder working folks, that had a sense of urgency, that really took pride in what they did and behaved like owners of the business. And I thought, being a small bank, I think we might have a size advantage just to attract some great people that want to hustle and deliver on that value prop to the community, because I just hadn't seen it. And maybe it was out there. I hadn't experienced it. Everybody was always complaining about their bank. No one was saying that, So anyways, that's the kind of philosophy. Fast forward, we're in 10 locations throughout South Florida. We've got an office in Cleveland, Ohio. That's where our digital team is located. We've got, as I mentioned, 10 branches. I think we've got some of the best bankers in South Florida working for Professional Bank. I'm very grateful for them to be on the team, that I get to work with so many wonderful people every day, not only on the front lines, but in the back of the office. There's so many great things that our bankers do. And my job simply is to create a franchise where people want to bank. There's a sense of personal touch to it, and where the best people want to work. In today's age, especially in the banking business, it's like the NFL. Everybody's a free agent, and I'm sure you've worked with one banker that's perhaps been at 3 or 4 different banks over the last 10 years. I'd like to be a bank where we attract some of the best bankers and they don't leave. And I would tell you that, we bank everybody. You don't have to have a minimum. You don't have to be in a certain business. Some people mistakenly take us, professional bank, that you need to be a professional. Well, that's not necessarily the case. Professional means professional to a lot of different people. We bank, not only the doctors, the accountants, and lawyers, but we bank teachers. We bank, nurses. We bank real estate developers, entrepreneurs, a ton of small businesses. I like to think that we've got a really good balance between having the great digital tools, service and product offerings, just as good as the big banks through our mobile and digital channels, but also have people here on the ground that can come to your house, that will come to your business, and eliminate as much of the brain damage in interacting with your typical bank as you can.
Dan, I can totally relate to the concept of having the smaller enterprise where the people are more willing to hustle than the big bank where it takes weeks and weeks to get anything done. In the financial industry, in many cases, it's a very similar arrangement. And sometimes working with the smaller firm, you're going to get a heck of a lot more attention. Now, the problem that I've always found with banks that were successful, or financial services firms that were successful in doing those things, is that they were so good at it that they grew so fast that they ended up either getting swallowed up by the bigger competitors, or they end up becoming one of the bigger players in the marketplace. So it's great to be along for the ride while you guys are on the upward trajectory at Professional Bank. One of the really cool things that you've done within the last 6 months is that you got to go basically ring the bell, I think, at the NASDAQ, because you took the bank public. How cool was that?
Cary, it was really special. The team and I, this is, we started the bank we started working on 2007, opened the doors in 2008, and to be a part of it from day one to pushing the button and opening the market on February 14th, 2020 was just really, really special. And it's only possible because I'm surrounded by such a great team to get us there. But it was really cool. I had my folks up there. I had Danny, Jack, and Kate, my kids, and my wife, Christy, were up there, as well as my executive leadership team and their significant others. It was a really special time. We we're the first bank IPO in 2020. And given what's going on right now, we may be the last bank IPO in 2020, the only bank IPO in 2020. But boy, was that a special time. We were allowed to take over, or were granted to take over the NASDAQ digital billboard in Times Square. And I had our digital team put together a rolling banner with just all of our employees' headshots on there. And so we were able to bring our entire org chart, all of our employees with us. Everybody can say that they were their face and that they were up in Times Square. And it was just such a cool experience being in the NASDAQ global headquarters studio. In fact, the studio we were in, that you ring the bell, is the same one that hosts the CNBC Squawk Box every morning.
Very nice. Well, congratulations, Dan, to both you and your team. If I can, I'd like to shift gears for just a few minutes and talk a little bit about some of the things that have influenced you over your life. Would you say that you've got one or two people that you would credit with being a phenomenal mentor to you?
Well, my dad has been such a great guy over time. When you're growing up to now, I just look back. There's different things you need. Different things you need. Skills or skills are just ways of thinking. And I would tell you, my dad gave me a long enough leash to let me go out and kind of make some mistakes on my own, which was really important. I was afforded probably quite a bit of freedom, perhaps more than some of my friends growing up. I did make mistakes along the way, but nothing was ever fatal. He always made sure that at the end of the day, I wasn't making any big mistakes. And, he is, to this day, I go around town and there's so much goodwill around town from my father being active, and he has really set a really high bar for the reputational capital that he's created for me and the family here in Palm Beach County. There's not a week that goes by that even now he says, oh, you must be Dick Sheehan's son, or let me tell you about a time when your dad helped me, or let me tell you about a time when your dad gave me some advice. And that's really cool for me, and I hope that I can at the end of the day leave as good a mark as he has done in the community. He's a charitable guy. He's the chairman emeritus of the Palm Beach chapter, the first tee of the Palm Beaches. Before that, he was very involved in the March of Dimes, was always seeking support and rallying around causes that involved, helping children and families that are disadvantaged. And he set a pretty high mark that I'm as I get older, it means more and more to me.
Dan, you certainly have big shoes to fill. Let me ask you this question. Is there I'm sure you set goals every year. Many of us set our own personal goals and business goals. For you, for Dan Sheehan, how do you define success? When will you know that you've made it?
Gosh, well, there's a lot of different ways to measure success, as you know, and I think that's where you're getting at with your question. I would define success as just being rich in friendships, and being healthy. And I'm fortunate to have a lot of great friends in town. Unfortunately, I don't get to see them as much as I'd like to because I'm, growing the business and so forth. I'm raising, 3 kids, but, great friendships. I want to be healthy. And last but not least, probably most importantly is I mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, I've got 3 young children. I just want to be the best dad who's really engaged, that have 3 happy kids at the end of the day. And if I can remain healthy, have great friendships in the community, and have three kids that are healthy and productive members of community, I'm good.
Yeah, and that's a great definition. Tell me a little bit about living in Palm Beach County and what it means to you. And, I called this podcast Business in Paradise because you were moved down here by your folks, but I chose to move down here because this place is just so fantastic. So you came back. Why'd you come back, and what do you love about it here?
Yeah, so, I kind of came back twice. So, the New York return to Florida is one set of reasons. And then the Miami return to Palm Beach County was another set. So, look, Florida in general is a great place. Palm Beach specifically is a great fit for the lifestyle I'm seeking. I mean, there's not a whole lot of places in the country that, you can play around a golf at a world-class, golf course in the morning, go out on the boat in the afternoon, come home and go to a great restaurant. And by the way, you live within 2 minutes of a great, private school and so forth. And for me, coming back, I'll share the calculus with you. Not only was it closer to family, so my kids get to have the grandparents in their lives for sporting events and so forth, but it's the schooling, as well as, being able to expose your kids perhaps to a little bit more, up here. And I tell you, the world's a little bit flatter. I find certainly in the bigger cities, while your kids might be exposed to more walking around on the sidewalk, there's pockets, right? So if you're living in New York City, there's certain cliques of families that just hang together. Certainly in Miami, similarly. Up here, I think your kids are exposed to just a little bit more with sports and a little bit more balance. And I think for Christy and I too, it's healthier. I think and I still commute down to Miami, once a week, once every 10 days or so. And I love Miami. I love Miami. I love the energy and love spending time down there. But coming back up here, my heart rate goes down a little bit. It's easier to find a parking spot. We still have great restaurants up here, and it's not hand-to-hand combat to get a reservation. And, the golf's great. I just think overall living and lifestyle is much more balanced up here versus elsewhere.
And Dan, just so our listeners know, tell us who your sports teams are, and do you have a sports hero?
So I am a Miami Dolphins fan. I am a Miami Marlins fan. As far as basketball goes, I'm a Miami Heat fan. I'm a Duke football fan for college. After that, I'm a University of Florida football Gators fan. Thank goodness they don't play each other every year. I don't think I have a sports hero in mind at all. I love a lot of the greats, and I love watching sports, not necessarily just because of the skills, but it's the mental toughness and the commitment that so many of these guys do, not only with their bodies, but with their minds. It's just really admirable what professional athletes do in that regard.
Dan, do you have a favorite business book that you've read?
Gosh, I have a bunch. I have a bunch. I can tell you that the most recent one I read, which I thought was great, was A Ride of a Lifetime by Bob Iger, former chairman CEO of Walt Disney Company. It was a great read. I've also read recently a book by Eric Schmidt, The $1 Trillion Coach. It was a really interesting story about a coach that Google hired and kind of transformed their culture and integrating so many different initiatives and just bringing, personal relationships into the culture. And those to name a few.
Those are great choices. Do you use a business coach, or have you ever used a business coach in what you're doing at the professional bank or before?
No, I haven't. Although, I'm fortunate to have, different friends and or people that I can call and be fairly frank with, and kind of talk through some of these situations. So I don't have a business coach per se, but depending on the issue, depending on the topic, I'm fortunate to have, people that I can reach out to and help me through certain times when I need a little bit of clarity or an outside thinking and new perspective on things.
Now, Dan, you've been an entrepreneur for many, many years. Is there one piece of advice that you would give to younger or newer entrepreneurs that are starting out a business as far as what they need to do to become successful, how they should conduct themselves, anything that just jumps out at you that you would say, hey, you're getting started, here's something you should think about?
Yeah, just don't let perfect get in the way of good. There's so many young people. I mean, it's interesting. I was interviewing some younger folks a year or two ago, and I remember seeing these things on their resume that you would have never seen when I was their age. But so many of them were going on sabbaticals, just taking time off, or they worked for this company for 6 months, then another company for 9 months. And look, I can appreciate people wanting to, experience new companies, travel, et cetera. Quite frankly, perhaps I should have done a little bit more of that when I was younger. But I would tell you that when you're young, you should if there's something that interests you, but isn't quite perfect, go for it. You never know what's right around the corner. You never know what new interests you might develop as a result of getting into a new profession. And early on, as I mentioned, it's important to learn what you want to do, but it's equally important to learn what you don't want to do. The older you get, the harder it is to unwind careers and start new ones. And so it's a lot easier the earlier on, go get a few bad jobs. You're not pursuing bad jobs, but get after it. Go get in there and learn a lot. I mean, the value is in the lessons that come with a bad job. The value is in the lessons that perhaps come with a failure of a business idea or a startup. It's the learning and reflecting on those experiences that puts you in such a better position when those decisions or your next decisions have a lot more on the line, i.e. you're older and you got a bigger commitment with supporting a family, et cetera. So I think, getting after it early and getting out and don't just seek, the highest paying job. Look, money comes and goes. You can't buy happiness. It's important to figure out what makes you happy.
And I would also add, and I know it's along the same lines, is don't be afraid to make mistakes. You're going to fail along the way, and you need to accept that, pick yourself up, and continue to move yourself along, because you will learn from every single one of those experiences. So listen, Dan, this has been a great conversation. I have one last question for you. And my last question is, what's next? What's your next act for Dan Sheehan?
Well, we're going to continue to grow Professional Bank. We've got aspirations to be a premier bank, not just in South Florida, but one day perhaps in other areas of the state. So an awful lot of energy is going into that, and quite frankly, a lot of my discretionary time, which is limited, but any leftover discretionary time is spent with the kids, and so I can't say that I have a next big act or that I'm pivoting from the vector that I'm on right now. but I'd like to think that each day brings new challenges with growing the bank. It's a consolidating industry. Florida is one of the best markets in the country, so it's one of the most competitive markets. And I'd say that look, I may be getting older numerically, but I want to stay young. So I want to stay healthy, and I'm eating. I'm watching what I eat more so than I ever have. I'm stretching more so than I ever have, and I need to keep up with these 3 kids.
Dan, we're going to have a longer conversation about how you can help me with some of those things because I can certainly improve in that area. Listen, you've been a great guest. I can't thank you enough for coming in the Business in Paradise podcast today. I'm Cary Stamp. Dan Sheehan, who is the CEO and chairman of Professional Bank and Professional Holding Corp., has been our guest today. Dan, thank you so much.
Thank you, Cary. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to the Business in Paradise Palm Beach podcast with Cary Stamp, founder of Cary Stamp & Company, Principal Wealth Advisors. Click the subscribe button below to be notified when new episodes become available. The information covered and posted represents the views and opinions of the guests and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of the Commonwealth Financial Network. The content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only. The content is not intended to be a substitute for professional investing advice. Always seek the advice of your financial advisor or other qualified financial service provider with any questions you may have regarding your investment planning. Cary Stamp & Company is located at 110 Bridge Road, Tequesta, Florida, 33469. Securities and advisory services offered through Commonwealth Financial Network member FINRA SIPC, a registered investment advisor.